So allow me to introduce our panelists, and then I'll conclude with our moderator for tonight, who will then launch our conversation. Utibe Udo is the owner of African Land, a retail establishment in Durham that specializes in African clothing, jewelry, art, and cultural products. Founded in 1989, the store is, as he says, a tribute to motherland Africa, promoting African culture and heritage in North Carolina. Born in Lagos State, Nigeria, Udo moved to Durham in 1981 to attend college. He received his BA in accounting from North Carolina Central University and an MBA from Campbell University. Uli Benowitz was born in Peru, raised in Germany, and educated in England. He first came to the U.S. in 1980, and his first job was to clear 9,000 acres of farmland in eastern North Carolina. Hoping to build a healthier local food system without chemicals and factory food processing, Benowitz built the Weeping Radish in Grandy, which has since grown into a 24-acre farm, brewery, butchery, charcuterie, and a restaurant. He helped inspire the brew pub bill that enabled North Carolina's microbrewing industry to boom. Thank you for that. Perla Seitz is the program director and co-owner with Rebecca Cabrera of the Chicle Language Institute in Chapel Hill. The institute offers classes in language and literature for children and adults, as well as translation and interpretive services in 12 languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, and Mandarin Chinese. Seitz was born in Mexico City, but she has lived in the local area since 1999. Her business partner, Rebecca Cabrera, is from Costa Rica, and she moved to North Carolina in 2009. Amit Singh is the president and CEO of SpectraForce Technologies, a global consulting firm headquartered in Raleigh. Singh moved from India to Raleigh in 1997 and earned an executive MBA from Keenan Flagler Business School in 2003. Today, SpectraForce provides a portfolio of consulting, staffing, and outsourcing services and solutions to a broad range of clients and industries worldwide, striving to promote innovative and creative behavior in its workforce and its business partners. Finally, our roundtable will be moderated by LaShawn Banks. As an undergraduate student at UNC, Banks studied abroad at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She later earned an executive MBA from Keenan Flagler Business School. As Associate Director for NC Growth, she leads programs in economic development and supports local startups in rural areas, creating jobs and equitable opportunities for people across the state. So please feel free to live tweet this conversation as we go. Follow us on Twitter. Your thoughts on it are welcomed. Use the hashtag, if you will, Making America. That's one of our strategic purposes with this conversation, is to think about what really makes the region of the South and what makes America. So that hashtag is a way to kind of connect to the conversation online. You can follow our take on the discussion at the account UNC South. Take it away, LaShawn.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're here tonight. So we're talking about these two major issues of immigration and entrepreneurship, and tonight we are going to combine the two. And we are very, very lucky to have this great panel. So I want to first jump into immigration and talk a little bit about that. Uli, this question is posed for you. We all know how important it is to assimilate when you go to another country. And a lot of times people think of assimilation as just mainly learning the language, but it's so much more than learning the language. So can you talk about what it was like for you when you got here and how you were able to assimilate and some of the things that you took on?
I hope I've assimilated. I'm not quite sure I have. I do feel very strongly about this issue. And I think it's a flashpoint because a lot of anti-immigrant is the perception that immigrants don't want to assimilate. And I think that's obviously, I have to speak up for that because I feel that most immigrants want to assimilate, want to be part of this fabric. I was raised in Bavaria. Those of you know Bavaria. You do walk around with lederhosens and things like that. And I never learned to yodel, but I did do the knee slapping and the whole 5 yards. And then went from there to England in my early 20s. And England is a very different culture than Bavaria, I can promise you. And then, of course, coming to Eastern North Carolina, wow, what a change. But I think without assimilation, you've got to open your arms when you enter a culture and absorb it. That doesn't mean you give up who you are, but if you don't open your arms and embrace the culture, you'll never be comfortable in that culture. So I think it is very important, and I've been very lucky that once but I do feel if you open your arms, there will be a reception, and you will become part of it. And if I just wish that this debate of immigrants versus non-immigrants would be, I think assimilation is the meeting point of the two sides. I think if the one side would accept that immigrants want to assimilate, and on the other side, some of the immigrants actually are willing to do that, we would have a much better debate. And we're in a tough spot, of course, right now when it comes to immigration. I've had 3 past citizenships in my life. I hope this is my last one. And I really feel very strongly that unless we embrace each other in thoughts and ideas, and living in rural eastern North Carolina, I mean, wow, they put me in a 4-wheel drive pickup truck. I'd never seen such a thing before in my life. And they gave me a farm radio. And if you ever listen to these people in eastern North Carolina, I spoke English fairly well, but I didn't understand a word they were talking about on the radio. So it took a while. First I turned the radio off for the first 6 months, obviously. But eventually, we all work together. And I have no problem in rural America at all. I live in a rural world and also live in a more urban world. But I think it's attitude more than anything else that brings us together. The attitude that we're willing to embrace each other culturally without giving up our identity. I think both of this can be accomplished. And I find this current debate, of course, very unfortunate because it creates an atmosphere where, this whole immigration debate is kind of off the rails right now. And it's such a shame because there is no doubt that immigration in every culture enriches the culture. There is no doubt about it. But it requires an open mind on both sides, and that's sometimes missing. So I've been very fortunate that I've been able to do that in my life, and I really hope that this message gets out as part of this discussion, that we do not create this. And the last thing on this same subject, only in America do you have African American, German Americans, English Americans, whatever. In Europe, you don't have that. You're either British or you're German, but you're not a Spanish German, or it doesn't exist. This is an American thing that is unique to this country, which is good and bad. I think it is in a way easier if you say, okay, fine, I moved to Germany, I have a passport. They require a lot. You have to learn the language. You have to learn the culture, you have to learn the history, but once you have your citizenship, you are a German, period. So in a way that makes it easier. I'm not saying you don't have problems with immigrants over there, but again, they are working in a different way, and they don't have this, everybody is their own little culture, but they create more of a forced assimilation, which has advantages, disadvantages, obviously. So, but it's an interesting subject in the current world, no doubt about it.
And Uli, I did want you to go first because you came here and you learned to assimilate when you got here. And you learned the culture and you learned how to live within the culture. Amit, you had a different experience when you came here. So can you talk a little bit about your assimilation and what you learned before you got here and how that worked out?
Yeah. First, thank you for inviting us. It's a great panel. Always love to come back to Carolina and share what this place has given to me. So it's very near and dear to my heart because this is where it changed for me. So I was born in India, in a big city, Mumbai, which is like a financial capital for India. So 97, I got here, coming down to North Carolina. In those days when we didn't have this, the world of internet was as prevalent as it is today. You didn't have social media. So the only view of US in those days growing up was the movies, Hollywood. And typically Hollywood movies, as you would know, is either shot in New York or Los Angeles. I don't know why aliens only target those two places. But that's what I had in my mind coming down to US, and Raleigh was a shock for me. I mean, it was, as we were talking, 6 o'clock, I was talking to you about that at dinner, that I landed here at 6 in the evening, and it was complete pitch dark, small airport. And the drive from there to my hotel was like, I said, is this America? Is this where what we see in the movies or what I'm accustomed to knowing? It was a complete, and I, coming from a city, imagine where we say in Mumbai that the life starts at 9 p.m. here at 6 p.m. It's like complete curfew kind of a deal. So it was very different, but also I came here in the time when, I don't know how many of you, probably this group may not have that, but many of us who are on the panel may remember year 2000, right? And the fear it had created for us that it's going to be a complete shutdown and the world is going to come to an halt. And that time, there was a big demand or need for software developers or software engineers, as you call it, which even today we have that challenge in states finding that talent. But at that time, it was really massive because it was time-bound. People wanted to figure out what to do with this Y2K thing. So there was a mass kind of exodus from places like India, where they were bringing anybody who knows anything to do with software was here. So I was lucky to get to the country, and I totally take your point and see this is a melting pot for people. I mean, to me, it was a land of opportunities, a dream. If you can't do it here, and where would you do that, right? And it's historically, if you see the immigrant population, and if you look in context of entrepreneurship, this is one of the most successful case studies globally, if anywhere. Take a look for Silicon Valley. I mean, there's a recent statistic which was created last year, 2017. And a lot of the studies, you can look at Kaufman and many other entrepreneurial studies who do that. They looked at 80, 90 Silicon Valley companies. And these are all specific companies which are $1 billion or more valuation, so very successful, high-growth companies. 45 or 46% of those companies had at least one founder who was an immigrant. And 71% of these companies have, in executive critical positions, immigrants. Over the years, in last 2 decades, 1 out of 4 new company formed in the US, small, mid-sized, large, was founded by an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. In a high-tech world or in healthcare, in the sectors where the growth is much higher, the numbers are much more steep. So it's like 45% or 44% of these companies have at least one immigrant founder or co-founder. In general, an immigrant population leads to close to 750 or 760, I don't have exact number, but somewhere on that range, $1 billion to our GDP. And immigrants founded companies, small business to mid-sized to large corporations, account for 1 of 10 people employed in the United States. So that's the power of what this country has created with immigration or the immigrant population. And I was lucky to travel. I travel a lot, and I was a part of a study which, again, from the school we did, where we look at what makes Silicon Valley, why it is the #1 place in the world for innovation, and companies like what we see every place, like Uber, Facebook, Apple, and so on and so forth. Because, think of this, it's a place, I was in Germany, I was in Australia looking at all these tech hubs. They say everybody who is somewhat successful or wants to be successful gets an opportunity, goes to Silicon Valley. So what we have created here is a melting pot of people who can come and contribute and create innovative companies, ideas, which then get implemented around the world. So that's what I think, I'm a small example of that, but when I came here, I came with that thing in my mind that this is a place to be successful. I completely concur that to be here and be successful, you have to understand the culture. So it's like be in Rome, be a Roman, right? So that concept applies truly to anybody and everybody who's traveling here and wants to make a career. I mean, you need not be an entrepreneur, but the opportunities are amazing. I mean, what has transpired in the last couple of years is just a small discussion. Now we are talking about immigration in context of whether it is rule-based or it's what economic value it brings in, or whether it is humanitarian ground. But in general, I think that's what has created what we are today. So it was a very different experience for me. I was prepared coming in here, and I had never feeling when we started the company or through the years that I'm not from here. It always felt a feel of, and that's a part of Southern culture also. I think we are very inclusive in terms of how we bring people here and how we treat people. So I had always great experiences in terms of how I was accepted and how it evolved over the years.
So the culture of your home country really has an impact on when you come here.
It has, and over the years, it's like we know that we talk about it's a flat world now, right? It's so interconnected globally now. From what I came here to now, people have a lot more understanding of what United States. I mean, and especially back in India, it's closely aligned where the services business and a lot of stuff happens on a daily basis where you call or get something done, whether the research or call centers or software development. It's a major service hub for the world, right? So people in the last couple of decades, as we grow into the workforce, they are trained how to conduct business with the U.S. So sometimes I'm amazed to see people knowing a lot more than I understand to deal with, and that's become a part of the tight-knit culture or tight-knit economy which we live in, and it's a global in nature. So I knew a lot more coming in what was expected and prepared, and again to piggyback on what you said, you have to act on it and continue to learn and be a part of this culture to understand the nuances. And this is an opportunity which I took it in both arms and helped me build a company and have grow it over the years and be successful from that perspective.
Okay. So I have some other questions for Perla and UTV, but feel free to comment also on assimilation when I talk about these other questions. And you talked about Silicon Valley, those companies with 1 in 4 of their founders being an immigrant. Fortune 500 companies also in 2016 reported that 40% of a founder will be an immigrant or a child of an immigrant. And so this is a major thing to take on, this entrepreneurship. So my question is, UTV, directed to you, what made you want to take on the challenge of becoming an entrepreneur, especially as an immigrant here?
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and greetings from Africa and motherland. I came as a student after high school. I was 19 years old, so I basically came with a student visa, and I just wanted to attend college. After college, I worked 2 years in the corporate world, but it was clear that I did not want to work under anybody. So basically, I wanted to take control of my own destiny, which is what I did. And I started at a very early age. Yeah.
Was it easy for you to assimilate when you got
Well, just like anything, nothing is easy. Just like he just said, you have to, don't wait for anyone to speak to you when you meet someone. If they don't speak, you speak. So I think the opportunity is here. You just have to learn how to go get your own. And at a very early age, I wanted to determine my own destiny. I did not want to work under anyone. It's not been easy, but in the end, I think I made the right choice.
Excellent. Perla, your situation is a little different. We know that there are all different types of entrepreneurships. And you actually purchased a company rather than starting one. So I do want to hear your story and a little bit about why you decided to take on that challenge of buying a company and what it was like for you when you came.
Right. Well, thank you for having me here. What happened is I started working in the company in Chicla Language Institute like about 17 years ago. The company was very, very new. It had just, because it was founded in 1999, so it had only been operating for 2 years, and then through some contact at the university, I started working there as a Spanish teacher. So the company started very, very small. We would only offer Spanish classes. We were only 2 Spanish teachers, and little by little, it started growing. We started growing the Spanish program and expanded it, not only classes for adults, but also for children. And then we got a request for translations, and then we started developing that part of the business. So years went by, and I kept working there. And then the owners were getting ready to retire. And then some other events happened. One of the owners died, and it was very hard for the remaining founder. So it was a hard year in which the company started not doing well financially. So this was in 2013, I believe. So a series of factors happened. The company wasn't doing well. The remaining owner was ready to retire. And also the leasing of the building where we were was going to end in a couple of years. So one day the owner gathered the staff and said, you know what, this is very hard for me because I know we're doing great work for the community, offering these language services and translations and interpreting, but I feel we cannot continue. So if nobody wants to take over the company or buy it, we're gonna close by December. So this was in August. So for all of us that were working there, it was a big shock, especially for me too, because I had been working there for so long, and I really loved doing what we do. And I thought, oh my gosh, this cannot be happening. So I said, wait a minute. Many times even before then, I had toyed with the idea about starting a similar company on my own. And some other people had approached me saying like, oh, why don't you open your own business? And I would be, well, it's not that easy, always making excuses, you know? But then the opportunity is like right there. And my business partner, Rebecca Cabrera, had been working as a Spanish teacher there for a while too. And she heard obviously what was going on. And she said, you know what, I'm really interested in doing this too. And I said, okay, why not? But the challenge for us was that we are Spanish teachers, we're not business people. Do we really want to do this? Are we going to be able to bring this company afloat? Because it was having so many financial problems. But we said, you know what, if we don't try right now, and if we don't give it a shot, it's all our lives we're going to be wondering what's going to happen, what could have happened if we hadn't taken the opportunity. So I said, you know what, we have nothing to lose. We know very, very well how the business works in terms of the services that we offer. We were very sure of how to offer quality language instruction, how to do translations, interpreting. So I said, okay, we'll just have to learn how to manage a business. So no problem, right? So we decided to say, okay, we'll take it on. The previous owner was very, very gracious. She's been a mentor to us all this time, and she said, okay, we were very lucky to make a deal with her, so we were seller financed, which means that basically she let us have the assets, and she said we strike a deal in which we would repay throughout time with cash flow from business operations. Right. So we knew there was potential to turn things around, and we were just needed to make some structural changes, and that's what we said we did, and thankfully it's worked. So 4 years down the road, we think we've made the right decision. It was very hard because it's not the same to just in charge of the Spanish program to, oh, now I have to do payroll.
Yeah.
Now I have to pay taxes. Now I have to, do all these things that before we didn't have to think about. So we've had very nice people around us who've been coaching us and helping us along the way. And one of the things we're sure of is like, okay, we have good quality product. We just need to learn the ropes in terms of marketing and things like that.
That makes sense. So I'm going to stay on you for a minute, Perla, and then I'll go back around the room. Out of those 40 jobs those 40% of companies that I talked about that have at least one immigrant founder, they create 18 million jobs worldwide. And so job creation is not the only way to measure impact. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what impact does your company have, not only on the community that you're in, but also yours has a unique impact on the immigrant community that you're in. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I believe that given the nature of the services that we offer, we've been able to help the immigrant community. In the past few years, there's been an increase in influx of refugee immigrants, especially from Myanmar and some other African countries and some Arab-speaking countries. So the need for interpreters in languages like Burmese, Karen, Kinyarwanda, Arabic has increased a lot. So in the past, agencies servicing these communities have relied on telephone interpreting, but it's definitely not the same to have someone interpreting for you on the phone that's having someone right there. So we've been able to provide these interpreters for these languages for medical appointments or school conferences with the parents, and that really makes a difference for the person receiving the service because they feel the communication flows easier and they feel more at ease when they're working with someone in right there as opposed to someone on the phone. And we've also, through translation services, we've also helped agencies in their reach out efforts, in their outreach efforts by translating a different type of documents like flyers for events or a list of local resources for the community or even research studies or medical information. So all this has really helped. I feel it's helped the community. And on a lower scale, other people that moved to the area have come to us to ask services for translation of documents like birth certificates, to do immigration paperwork or school transcripts to apply to school. So in that part, we're providing a service too. It's good to have someone local you can go to as opposed to trying to find someone on the internet who is based you don't know where, right?
Right.
And also from the other perspective, from the language instruction part, when people come to us to learn a language, when you're learning a language, in the classes, we also talk about culture of the country that language is spoken.
So assimilating.
Yeah, so we all know here there's a big Hispanic community, so we teach them about not only Spanish, but cultural things from our countries. So that helps people relate better to the people in the community and help them communicate with them. So we feel very happy to be able to share our culture, and that brings an understanding between the two parties, the people who is learning the language, and then understanding and trying to make an effort to reach out those in the community.
Yeah.
And then people who don't speak English well come to us to learn more English because they want to assimilate. And not only people who don't speak English, but we've gotten as businessmen or visiting scholars that come to us because they want to improve their business English or their grammar or even accent modification, which can be as an immigrant, that is a challenge too sometimes when you speak, but people don't understand what you're saying. So that can be very frustrating. So we've helped in that sense as well.
That's amazing. UTB, I wanted to take it to you now because I know that you have a different type of impact on your community, especially with all the people that come into your shop and the advice that they ask. So can you talk a little bit about the people that come to you and the impact that you have?
Okay. Basically, when I started African Land, I just wanted to sell the merchandise. I wanted to showcase African products. And I wanted to do that in the United States. But as the year go by, I started seeing people come in for other needs. So African Land has transformed from just being a store to like a place where people come like this and we just talk about anything. And I found out that people, they have other needs. Mm-hmm. Some need to learn about who they are, their culture, their heritage. So we have all those dialogues. And in the end, I found out that we are all the same people. We are one people. We just need to be patient and tolerant with each other and try to understand each other. So African Land is moving away from just being a store. Hopefully it's going to turn into like a gallery where I can showcase most of the African products. Then I can have other places where I'm not a forum where I can really motivate the young ones, the ones that are coming up, and show them how to build their character first. No, show them how to find who they are, discover who they are, so they can build their character. Then they can go out there and achieve anything they want. So they don't depend on their daddy, their mama, and all that stuff. So you have to pick it up wherever you are and go out there and make it, and you can do it.
And these are not just immigrants that come to you.
Anybody.
Anybody that comes into African Land can get it.
If you want to start a business, if I could go a little bit into
it. Yeah, definitely.
When I started, I had about $100 in my pocket. I really didn't know what I want. I mean, I wanted to start a business, but I didn't know how I was going to do. I didn't have any connection. I didn't have anything. But I had that hunch, that drive to succeed. Okay. And another thing, and my family, my friends, everybody was like, "How are you going to do it?" I still remember all that stuff. But all I did was do it. I did it. I went on my own. And this is one thing I'll tell you young ones. That's really all you have to do is to start. You can sit and talk all day, but if you don't make that step, that's really all you have to do. If you make that step and if you build your character, everything that you need will come to you. I don't go after anything anymore. They come to me. But I had to build my character. I had to learn how to deal with people, be trustworthy. Then that's when people can see you. If you're all over the place, nobody's going to do business with you. So you have to know who you are. Don't be confused. There's a lot of confusion out here. Once you get that aspect, decide on anything you want to do and go for it. And once you go for it, I believe it's going to work out. And another thing is, the problems, they're going to come. The problem is embedded in life. There's nothing you do, you're not going to have problems. But you have the power. So you have to keep, and the problem is temporary. Any problem is not permanent. So you have to keep trying. When you keep trying, the problem will disappear. That's how people succeed. Yeah.
You brought up a very interesting point. You said you didn't know anyone or had someone to go to. And a lot of entrepreneurship is really about the network. And for someone being here, born in America, having a network that they can rely on or having people that they can go to, being able to do it all on your own, especially being from another country, is remarkable. And with that, Uli, I wanted to get to the impact that you had on your community and how you built that network with talking with chambers of commerce and meeting with different people, and even talk a little bit about the law that you created and how that got started.
Well, my story's a little bit different. I've never done homework when I was in school, and sometimes that's a good thing, because if you do your homework and you try to figure out what you want to do, and then you see all the problems, you might not tackle them. But if you just don't worry and just get on with it without even doing homework, by the time you realize what you're into it, you have no choice but to keep on battling. So that was a story about the microbrewing. My brother lives in Munich, and he called me and said, look, I'll have a little brewery here. Do you want to buy it? And I said, sure. And then somebody said, you better check with ABC. I didn't know what ABC was. I thought some sort of learning center. Turns out to be alcohol beverage control. And I met with those folks, and they said, well, it's a great idea that you want to do, but it's illegal, which is always a wonderful way to start a project. But at that time, we had a very interesting senator on the coast, and we sat down with the ABC Council, and we wrote a law allowing these brew pubs to come to this state. And it was an amazing process for somebody. At that time, I was on a visitor's visa in the United States, and it probably was the only law that was ever passed by a guy on a visitor's visa. I think it was probably expired at that time. And if you try that today, they probably lock you up. But it was a fascinating process to see how legislation, I mean, for an immigrant to go in front of a Senate and a House and watch this process unfold is absolutely unique. I mean, this is an incredible experience for anybody. So I feel truly honored to have been given that opportunity to pass your own bill. It's probably the only bill, by the way, that was ever passed without a single attorney hour being billed either, so that's an interesting one. And of course, I learned a lot. I mean, I didn't realize what a dry town was. And we opened North Carolina's first brewery in a dry town, which wasn't a very smart thing to do either. So we've learned a lot on the way. But what I find so fascinating about that is that how this microbrewing has now evolved into North Carolina alone $1 billion industry. And it's not about, it is about beer, but not only about beer. It is about communities. If you look at these brew pubs that spring up everywhere, it is the yearning of these often abandoned towns to recreate communities. And a friend of mine owns a coffee shop, and he has the exact same thing. If you would have told me that in our little town of Manteo, North Carolina, when we moved there, we would end up with 2 coffee shops, 2 microbreweries and a distillery 30 years later, I would have laughed out loud. But there is a yearning for communities to get together again and to meet in places and communicate again. And that to me is, especially the young generation, I find it absolutely fascinating that the young generation is so into this community building. And especially in rural America, the amount of communities that have come up and said, look, would you open a brew pub in our town? Of course, I politely declined. But that's what they want. They want to create a place other than a church where people can meet. And that, to be part of that movement, to me, is the greatest honor of my life, quite honest, because I just find that is something that is real progress in a world that sees so many dark things. I turn this around and say, hey, let's look at the bright spots. And if the young generation gets together in these communities, if it's internet cafes, whatever it is a different country that I came to 30 years ago, and it's a fascinating place. I've never regretted having moved here, and it's been a true honor to having been one of those so-called pioneers in this microbrewing world, which is now celebrated throughout the country. And interesting enough, the Europeans are now coming over to America, studying what we do, with regards to these communities. And if you would have told me that 30 years ago when I came to America, the Europeans would come over here and learn from us how to open brew pubs, I would have laughed out loud. And so it's amazing. The vitality of this country when it comes to these things is truly fascinating. One last thing, if you ever go to a microbrewing conference, let me tell you, it is a fascinating place to go. The average age is under 30, and the enthusiasm is everywhere. It is phenomenal. On the opposite side, I've been to a Budweiser plant, and I promise you the average age of the workforce is probably 58, and all they talk about is unions and retirement, and that's all they want to talk about. Wow, what a difference, the generational gap between those two sides. And I know which side I'd rather be on, I promise you. So, thank you.
Awesome. We talk about this network and how important that is, but another big part of entrepreneurship is raising capital. And so a lot of times to raise capital, you need a network. So Amit, I want you to talk a little bit about what it's like to raise capital. I know everyone raised capital in their own way, if at all, but can you talk a little bit about raising capital as an immigrant, how it's done in other parts of the world?
So when we started our company, Spectraforce, in 2004, especially, and I'm not sure how many of the audience is actually looking to be in an entrepreneurship. And so there are two types, broadly speaking. There's a bootstrapped company, which is you bootstrap and find friends, families, and 3Fs we learn at school: friends, families, and fools who will invest in you, right? And then you have the classic, the venture capitalist or route or the investor route, and there are different terminologies from angels to private equity and goes into bank. So you have different ways you raise capital. So when I came in, one of the key reasons to get into a B school over here in Carolina was to understand what it is to do, because I was an engineer by trade. I had no clue how to start a business, let alone raise capital. Mm-hmm. But I think getting structured education helped me to at least understand what are the channels or ways to raise capital or get capital at different stages of the company. And also it allowed me to build a network. So this was a great place to start. And one thing I've learned over the years is a simple basic 101 of networking is you would find the most critical networks in the least places you would imagine, and whenever early on when we started the company, I would go with an intent of networking and seeking something out of that, I would get nothing. And typically it's very easy to exchange cards. I'll get really happy. Next thing I'll shoot an email and that person never responds back. And you get really disappointed that, hey, the guy was very friendly and said, call me and whatnot, and nothing happened. But as you start understanding the concept of networking, it's about giving than getting. So the more you go with an intent of being, as you pointed out, being genuine and transparent and contributing to something, it comes back multifold. So that's what I learned here at school, and then sort of shifted. A lot of key aspects in our business happened when I never expected. Getting major clients, I would, simple cases where I was at Keenan Flagler giving a talk, and the next thing I see somebody from the audience come later, and he's a CIO of a company and says, hey, you guys do this? And I said, yeah. I said, would you mind getting together and we would want to do some work or explore something? And then next thing, it's one of the biggest clients it becomes. So a lot of those kind of things happen where you least expected it. The whole idea for me was to build that aspect, and I learned over the period of time. As going back to raising capital, we were a bootstrap company. Mm-hmm. So 3F model, it was, and I joke with this, I say this to the business school students at Carolina, as if you go to the B school, you will put together a business plan. A business plan is something very critical, and which is a bunch of assumptions in there, because typically you will look at what's the market, what's my service or product offering, and how I'm going to capture the market. And then you will put all different aspects of business plan, as you probably remember from the school days, right? And do competitive analysis, financial analysis, and then how will you execute the plan. But end of the day, it's a document, right? And it's a lot of assumptions. You're not exposed to what the market is. And we had a great plan. The school, I got an award at school. Like there was everybody said it's a great plan. But when I started Spectraforce, no capital, it literally hit me that, this is just a bunch of assumptions. And when you start talking to potential customers, and especially in the service business, you cannot raise capital because service compared to a product is a concept you're selling. And only time you will sell and somebody will buy, and you give a value when you deliver a service, right? So it's very hard to raise capital, and quickly we had to pivot and change our model and even our business to how we conducted it. So we started with a small and mid-sized business, and we'll do software development for them, and eventually moved to large companies who understood the concept of globalization, outsourcing, and pivoted that way. But the key thing is to be flexible. And then what I learned was, in simple fact, is when you need money the most, you don't get people to. And when you don't need it, like we have banks, investors emailing every day, hey, can we invest in your company or your companies and stuff like that. So the key here is to keep doing that concept of networking, and you, most of the times you'll see that it's the last place you expected because you didn't go with the intent of selling, and you get something out of it. So those, and then I think a lot I got from this place, school itself, and the networks and the people I never knew helped in ways where I would have least expected, whether it was clients or even getting our employees or people who were who turned out to be the best in over the years. It happened through networking. It's not just the capital, because you're talking about assets and resources. People in today's economy, when we are living in a world of innovation and technology, it's all about talent and it's about people. I think that's a bigger difficulty for most corporations, whether it's a Facebook or Apple, to a small startup in Chapel Hill. It's and even as far as SBA, if you go on SBA, Small Business Administration, we talk about why businesses fail. Most people would say it's because of capital, and actually it's not. It's the number 2 reason. The number 1 reason is because the lack of information, or the key basic information as an entrepreneur, and the networks which you have to execute an idea. And capital is obviously a very critical component, but it's second. Going back and thinking what I would have known 15 years back, what I know today, and what do I have known, how would I have done differently? Because there's so many things you as a startup, as most of the panel would agree, that you have to churn your wheels to do the basic nuts and bolts. But today I know, hey, I can call someone, or it could have been an advisor who can just tell you what to do, at least in the first 2 years when it's the most struggle to start a business and take it to a stage where it becomes a little more going concern, that it's not just the money, it's about what you know and how to execute, and that's where the network becomes very critical. So I think that plays a very important role for companies to be successful.
I agree.
And that was something which the network or people here, or even globally where we had in India, business helped to take critical steps in the organization and in the first few steps in the company to get past those hurdles.
That makes sense. I have a couple more questions, but we're running short on time, so I wanted to see if the audience had any questions that you're dying to get out. I'll start with you in the middle. So you're going to have to stand up and yell your question.
Hi everyone, my name is Ruth Samuel. I'm a first-year student here at Carolina. My parents are Nigerian, so that's one of the things that motivated me to come here today, is just hearing these different journeys and how they correlate to my parents' experience. So we talked a lot about assimilation, and I feel as though assimilation gives way to lack of authenticity. So in regards to when it's time to open a business, it's in a way to fill a void. And so when it comes to garnering clients or people to come in and take advantage of the services you're offering, how does assimilating and hopefully not losing part of your culture and those ideals and those things that you can offer to them, how does that affect profit? Like, how can you actually have like a profitable business but sacrifice these things that make you so unique?
Right. Who wants to take that on?
Go ahead.
Well, let me just try and say, I don't know if I quite understand the question, but when you come here as an immigrant, you already have your values. So that shouldn't change. So what we're talking about is when you come to a new environment, you have to be open-minded so that you can see opportunity. It doesn't mean you have to give up anything. You just have to be more willing to network with other people.
Did you want to add to that, Amit?
So, and I totally agree to what you cannot. We all have certain individuality which we don't want to change, and when we form a company or there are certain principles or values by which you operate, and that becomes the foundation of what you will operate, because that also becomes critical to how you will attract people, customers. See, in the simple philosophy of any business, whether it's a product or service, more in the service business, is people like to conduct business with who they enjoy working and they trust. Trust is the most important factor, and you cannot build trust by faking something or doing something which is not you, right? And one thing I think when I'm listening to everybody else on the panel, that aspect comes out so clearly that nobody from the panel forgot who they were, and what they see here is an opportunity where it's equally, as you've seen over the decades, that people are very inviting for the immigrants. So you don't have to change what you are. I mean, as you pointed out, this is the only country where you have African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans. So and I never thought of that conceptually.
Right.
It doesn't apply in Europe or other parts of where you don't see that. And so it's accepting and it's known for that. So you don't have to change anything. The key here is when you're starting a company, what are you offering, whether a product or service? You're changing a philosophy or behavior for someone. Because if you're offering something different or new, but it doesn't happen on the context of you changing yourself or your value system or your originality or your background. It's something which you're offering as an organization. And your originality is what attracts us, because that's what allows you to sell to someone in the truest form. And that's what can multiply if you don't lose that and you build on that. So you don't have to change. You just have to adapt, but whatever you're selling, and making profit and not making profit is a function of what you're selling, right? Whether it's a service offering or it's a product. If somebody, you're changing a behavior for a customer who's ready to buy at a certain price point, that itself is what you're selling. I mean, that depends on what your product or what their idea is or what your solution is. But one thing I would say there, and this is again an MBA concept which you probably, LaShawn, you say is, what I've learned, you might have the best idea. Ideas are dime a dozen today, okay? But it's the people who take the idea forward. So if you have a idea, or a team with a B idea or a C idea versus you have a B idea or a C idea with an A team, which one I will pick? 100% I will pick a C idea with an B idea with an A team. Absolutely. It's the people who make the idea and take the company forward. 100% of time. It's not the idea. I mean, you've seen many stories you will hear of companies who were the best of the best, whether it was the first mobile phone, Iridium. I don't know how many of you have heard of that company. I mean, but it never took off. Even Microsoft started with the first tablet, but Apple when it landed. So it's not about the idea itself. It's how you execute the idea, who executes the idea. So it's the people who makes the difference.
In the middle.
Yeah, I have a question, and it's for Amit, is that correct? And my question's about mainly about Silicon Valley. And you spoke about the significant economic impact that immigrant-owned businesses are making in the United States today, and specifically in Silicon Valley. you cited that immigrants created an estimated $650 billion for economic value in the United States, and a large amount of this resulting from tech-related fields. However, a significant number of these of the technology startups today are being outsourced. The jobs are being outsourced to other countries. And I was looking through your website, and a main feature or function of your company is you offer outsourcing features. And so I'm really curious, do you think that Americans are really benefiting as much as you claim, since a large portion of these new jobs in technology are just being outsourced to other countries and visa workers are filling them within the United States?
That's a great question. First of all, I don't know how much time we have to talk on that topic. It's a very broad question. So two things. First of all, coming from a company, what you probably looked at is one of our companies, SpectraForce. We have three other companies, Leoforce, Brigera, which are product-based companies. We employ more people in the United States than we employ anywhere else in the world. So our workflows globally is close to 2,500, but out of that, close to 2,000 are based in the States. Okay, so we have close to 400, 500 people in India, and some in Canada and Jamaica and Puerto Rico. So it's not that we outsource everything. There's work happens here as well in the US. Second thing, it's a flat world. Okay, so the innovation comes from here. So the reason why some of these jobs or if you look at, it's not just the services, products. I mean, most of the products currently probably even you're using are probably not manufactured in the United States. It's probably in China or in Taiwan or other parts of the world. The reason why it's the case is because we get at a competitive prices which we may not get. I'm not saying we don't build anything here, the innovation. So even take an example of a company like Apple, right, which is one of the most innovative companies currently in business. But if you look at the supply chain for even, let's say, an iPad or an iPhone or an Apple Watch, it probably touches 10 to 15 countries. But if you look and turn it back, it says designed in LA or it's in, but what happens is it's Foxconn, it's in China, which actually the parts of which goes in that product comes from every other places, and then it's assembled and it's shipped to wherever it is. But it's actually the core of that company is in the United States. The most valuable jobs which Apple has today are based in the US. Okay, and that's the reason why it can build that product at a price point which we all can buy. With that said, it's not necessary to indicate that not everything, a major chunk of that can be done in US, but it's a global economy. I mean, and those products are not just sold in the US. Think of it, the biggest customer for Apple is China. Okay, what happens with that? It comes back to US. So look at most of the automotive companies. The GM, Ford, Chrysler during 2008 timeframe were in tough times when we had that economic bust, right? But which are their biggest markets today are Asia. Airlines, Boeing and Airbus, there are two major companies. The biggest buyer for these airlines today, the growth is in China, India, and those places. They're buying the major deals for Airbus and Boeing, specifically for Boeing, is happening in those countries, but they're employing people in here, and it's assembled in Seattle and other parts of. So it's a global economy. So the point here is, while we see a small percentage of jobs which are being, and if you look at the entire scheme of things, how many jobs are created in US versus how much is outsourced, it's a very smaller chunk, and what is lost as a result of it is not as massive as some reports point out. You might want to go and take a look at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs studies, specifically the services industry. We should be more worried about what automation and artificial intelligence is going to do as opposed to what jobs are going to India, China, and that phase has sort of slowed down a bit. Go ahead, you had a question on that? So the thing what is worrying people today, or which is being discussed today, is what is AI, artificial intelligence, robotics is going to do. Because if you look at the study again, Department of Labor also have conducted, there will be many jobs in the next decade or two, which will be done by machines. Today, I mean, we are in a business, one of our companies is Leofos, which is a robotic artificial intelligence platform, which allows you to find talent on social media platform, engage with talent using chatbots or bots which talk to people. But today there's a lot is changing, and automation is going to take over certain types of job which will become redundant. So how we can reskill people and utilize and put them to work and use this as augmenting to create better products and services, what industries are doing. That's what the Silicon Valley is spending most time in today.
Thanks, Amit. I think we have time for just one more question. You in the middle.
So if automation is the biggest factor that's going to hurt American workers going forward,
It's globally.
Globally?
Yes.
Well, then why would it make sense to bring in more immigrants to displace American workers?
So that's a great question again. What immigrants are, if you look at it, it's again a demand and supply thing, right? I mean, the most places where you, even if I look at the policy and the way it's governed, people just, it's very hard to come to US today. It's much harder, it's not just in the last couple of years, it's become much harder over the last decade to come to. I would say the inflection point was 9/11, was one of the times when it changed significantly how we see and how we view immigrants in many ways. But the case where you ask why would we need to bring in more immigrants today, because it's a case of demand and supply also. Okay, so we as a country are the leading edge place for major technologies, major innovation. If you look at worldwide, if you think of any major success story, it comes out of here majorly. When you think of healthcare, artificial robotics, whether it's a pharmaceutical or you look at healthcare, a lot of that comes from here. The innovation happens here. The challenge is we don't have enough, and this is a complete different topic. The STEM education here is not at par with what the country demands in terms of innovation in the jobs. There's not enough, and I debate a lot and talk about what's happening in our STEM compared to the 50 most industrious countries in the world. We are not at that. And there are countries which are spending a lot more on education system, because what we do today will mean what will happen 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And what we are learning in schools today, in my view, is not relevant to what the future workforce is needed. Okay, I mean, just a few years back, Mark Zuckerberg and even Bill Gates said, you don't have to get an MBA and go to a whole, and I'm not exactly saying the same thing, but what they're saying, get your kids to learn a programming language, and they'll do fine. The point here is our education system still needs to have a complete revamp in terms of how we prepare our workforce. And until we do that, you will see this demand and supply issues where we'll have to bring in foreign workers from China, elsewhere, who have ramped up their education system in terms of STEM, to do the work which we need to conduct here, to still stay at the top of the pyramid in terms of creating new innovative products and services. So it's more of a demand and supply thing. It's not because it's just cheaper. These guys come here and people are getting paid. If you look at the general salaries in the high-tech companies, it's significantly higher. And it not necessarily can be discriminating because the immigrants make lesser or more. If you look at immigrant population, they generally make more money rather than making less. So it's not like they're cheaper technically if they come and work here. So it's more of a demand and supply, and continuing on the leading edge of the innovation what we do here. And that's the reason why immigrants come, because we don't find that kind of a talent here.
Thank you, Amit. I think that we are out of time, so I wanted everyone to say thank you to the panel, and we are so glad that we had them here tonight. I'm sure a couple of these folks may be able to stay after, so thank you.